He was a quiet man, an artist, a craftsman, very conscious of his surroundings, a landscape artist mostly at that time. So he taught me to observe nature, to see the beauty of what was in front of me. Nothing elaborate, just the hedges, the trees, the grass. To notice the sky. He was also very conscious of good work. He loved carpentry. He taught me how to use tools. And I remember so well him saying, pay attention. Keep your eye on what you're doing. When you're sawing a piece of wood, listen and watch the movement. Listen to and watch the movement of the saw. Watch the hammer, so you hit the nail straight. And these two lessons of 100% giving attention and observing what was around me have stood me in good stead all my life. Mum was Russian. Well, she was also an artist in her way. She was a housewife, of course. That's what women were then. They called themselves there and were proud of it. Mum was always, when Women's Lib came in, she said, there's nothing wrong with being a mother and a housewife. Anyway, well, what I got from Mum was primarily a Russian heart. And Russian hearts, they just spill out all over the place. I was always told as a child, I wear my heart on my sleeve. Well, people laughed at me, but it's one of the best things to have a great heart. And the whole household shone with that tender, loving care that emanates from her. Someone that loves their work and gives themselves to it. The way the table was laid, the way she knitted our clothes for us, did the mending, did the washing up, everything was a work of art and done with love. It was a shock because up till then we lived in the deep country and I hardly knew what another little boy was. My companions were nature and animals, and I was suddenly thrown into this world of other little boys, and I was completely lost, and for the first time in my life I knew what it was to feel isolated and lonely. Thank God the school was in a rural setting, so there were big gardens where I could go, and also in my little childish way I remember so well just burying my little head in my hand and closing my eyes and saying, God bless Mummy and Daddy and my sister and our dog. And what a haven of home and security that was for me. As a young man, I still don't know really what they are. Who doesn't know what God is? Nobody knows what God is. But there's, how can I put it? Perhaps one longs for the unlimited, for freedom and for love. And in worldly experience, all these things are finite, they have an end. You go out, you discover freedom, go out and climb a mountain, but then you've got to come home again. Love is wonderful in its flowering, but then sooner or later it says no, it has an end. All the things you long for, happiness, it all comes and goes, doesn't it? And I think perhaps I was just greedy. I wanted that which didn't end. I wanted to make the world a better place. I'd loved farming since almost my first breath. I was soaked in farming. I just wanted to be a farmer. It was my overriding sort of dream, really. And I'd spent some time, I'd studied the subject, and it was the time when these charities like Oxfam were just beginning, and so it was sort of the fashionable thing, really, I suppose. I had another mate, and we were going out to Bolivia. We were going to they were giving grants of 1,000 hectares to new settlers who'd go out and grow food for the hungry. So we thought we'd go out and do that. We were young and strong. But my mate didn't come. He met a girl that stayed in England, and I met a Peruvian girl, and her father invited me to go and work for him in Peru, so I did that. But on a big sheep hacienda. But that was my time of, sort of socialist time of my life, and I wanted to do good, so I ended up working as a volunteer agriculturist in the mountains of Peru. I wouldn't say it was easy, but there was plenty of space up there, and I loved that. I loved the donkeys and the oxen. And yes, it was a good year. But I think, like most people who've done voluntary service, I learnt, it gave me much more than I gave to it, really. And I learnt probably the greatest lesson of my life. I remember sitting on a mountainside one day. I'd done a lot of work, or a little bit of work with planting trees on eroded mountainsides. And of course the local sheep and goats had come and eaten them all off, and I was sitting there a bit depressed. And it seemed that a little voice seemed to say to me, to make whole, be whole. I hardly understood what that was then. But I had read a little bit about meditation, not that I really understood it. But I saw myself as a mixed up young man trying to help people, the local Indians, older and wiser than myself and more able to live. And I realized I had to do something about sorting out myself before I could be much use to others. So having read a bit about meditation, when I came home to England, I looked for and I found a school of meditation. I had a pal, and we found an Indian who'd take us, and we had several days in the jungle, just walking through the jungle. It was an incredible experience. Yeah. It was absolutely wonderful. The jungle's very thick. It's quite difficult to walk through. Yes. It's mostly these great trees above. There's very little sunlight comes down to the forest floor. You creep along over the fallen leaves and these huge lizards and snails and snakes. You see monkeys up in the trees. And at one point we came to a little creek with a sandy banks. And there was a great sort of furrow gouged out of this sand, as though someone had dragged a big oil barrel through it. And we looked at the guide, and it was a huge snake, an anaconda. Huh. And I wanted to follow up and find it, but he wouldn't let me. He said it would be lying curled up, ready to grab us. Yeah. And then it started to rain, and we camped just near there, just beside it. And just made a little fire. I was sleeping on the ground there. And I didn't sleep very well. I think maybe I woke up in the middle of the night, and the rain had cleared. And you know, the jungle's full of shrieks and funny sounds, rustlings at night. It's all the animals come out and move around. And I sat there by the campfire in this little circle of light and thought of this great snake. I could reach out and touch it probably, for all I knew. And I began to feel fear. Here we're alone in this jungle. If the Indian deserted us, God knows what we'd have done. And then quite inexplicably, perhaps I stopped fighting. I gave up the struggle. I surrendered. I just relaxed into the situation as it was, into the unknown. And I suddenly felt peace, such as I'd never felt before. Just total peace, in which all the threats that surrounded us were contained and all right. And I look back on that as one of my first great spiritual experiences. It's so obvious. We're sitting in it like fishes in the sea. You can never not be still. But the trouble is, we just don't see it. We look down, and we just live in this cocoon of mental agitation, lost in thought. That's the human condition, at least what we call the human condition. But actually, it's lost. It's not reality at all. It's not what we are. And this is the cause of all our problems. We're absent from the presence of God. Present is such an important word.
Yeah.
Now, the present moment, here and now, the present moment. You can hear the church clock chiming, can't you?
I can.
It's sounding in stillness, isn't it?
It's 1 o'clock.
In stillness and in timelessness. Time goes round, round and round, in eternal presence. The peace of God that passeth understanding, right here and now. We can never be closer to God than right here and now. Yes, I had to go to London to be taught. I was taught. The first practice, my first farm was at Bakewell then, so I had to get the late night train back from London to look after my animals next morning. And I was sitting in St Pancras Station waiting room among all the rubbish and unfortunate drunks and homeless that used it. And I sat and closed my eyes and meditated as I'd been told. And there and then, in that seemingly uncongenial situation, it opened up like that. And I realized that all the space, the freedom that I longed for, that I'd been traveling the world to find in the deserts and mountains of this world, were within me. And that discovery, well, it's been going on ever since. Bigger and bigger, greater and greater, better and better. It was the beginning of realization.
Yes.
Of course, I had the theory. I was brought up in a Christian school. I had 10 years of chapel and scripture lessons. I knew a lot of the Bible by heart and the old prayer book. The kingdom of God is within you. I'd learnt that, but what did it mean? I didn't really know. But very soon, in those first few periods of meditation, I realized that there was this dimension that was not of this, or not of what we call this world. There was a further dimension that could be realized. That's the word, realization. You know, the biblical phrase comes alive. The kingdom of God, what does that mean? I don't know, it's difficult to say even now. But it's within you, it really is within. And the peace of God that passes understanding, it's beyond the thinking mind. You don't get it by substituting one thought for another, but by opening up to this dimension of spirit, really. That's what it is. Invisible, you can't describe it. But everybody knows what silence is. No one can describe it. And within this stillness, the bodies, the personalities, the sounds took place. And actually pervaded everybody. And if you look at people's eyes, every eye shines with more or less light. Even if the eye is very dulled, it's the same light, isn't it? How many lights are there? There's only one light, isn't there? And so it is, there's only one stillness, there's only one spirit. And I think that these first experiences of mine were like that. There are levels of consciousness. If your heart is light, if your heart is full of light, you see light, and everything that's in it is light. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? If your eye is full of beauty, that's what you see. I decided to stay with meditation because even in those early months I realized, or I felt it was, at least for me, a more effective way of spiritual work. The accusation is often made that meditation is a withdrawal from this world, but absolutely on the contrary. The key principle of the method that I taught was that you practice it while living in the world. A monkey's life may possibly be considered a withdrawal from life, from worldly life, but meditation absolutely not. It's the art of finding the eternal in the midst of, in the marketplace, the stillness in the movement. One of the great loves of my life are sheep. I could tell you a lot about my understanding of the Lamb of God. Anyway, at that time I had quite a considerable flock of sheep, about 150 sheep, and I had 5 rams, I think. And one of these rams was an old warrior where through much fighting, he'd split his skull and was old soldier. And just before things happened, I had to move on from my first farm. And I was sitting at one side of a field. I'm not sure if I'd been crying, but I was very unhappy about it all, losing my beloved animals. And these rams were lying under a hedge on the other side of the field, about, I suppose, 100 yards or so away. And to my amazement, one of these rams, this old warrior, he stood up, he left the others. Slowly and deliberately he walked across the field. He laid his head in my lap and just stood there for a minute or 2 or 3. And he turned away and went back and lay that day with his companions. It brings tears to my eyes to tell you. Well, I had a second farm then. It was a lovely little farm. That's really another story. And I was happy as a farmer. I was married by then and had a good wife. But we had many meditation students at that time used to come to the farm. I was quite well known as one of the first organic farmers. There was a woman that came to meditate, and on one occasion, we meditate with closed eyes, by the way, so we were sitting together, we'd just come to stillness, and I saw our 2 souls rise from our bodies and merge as one. She was a woman with very open, clear eyes. And when I looked at her, I saw right through to the infinite beyond. Well, you've got to realize there are 2 sorts of sight. There's the eyes of flesh, and there's what's called insight, seeing with the eyes of the heart. Fleshly sight is always limited. It has a boundary. Flesh sees flesh. But we all have, to some extent, a sense of even indescribable beauty or indescribable peace or something like that. What did I see? I saw the indescribable, right? I saw the infinite indescribable. But it's the realest of the real when you see it. And what really tipped me into depression was that I was still a young man, a hot-blooded young man. Still, very much living in my physical body and my human emotions. How do you reconcile the 2? There was that spiritual union, if you like, the mystical marriage, contrasted with 2 people living lives, both with their own marriages, their homes, their jobs.
Yes.
I couldn't go back into that old life. Of course, I couldn't escape it either, really. I was sort of imprisoned in it. you know, I went back home, you know, and there was my dear wife, but somehow it was all too small. I couldn't sort of, I'd been shown something. Well, anyway, the gist of it was, it threw me into a turmoil of emotions, and I left. I had to really break away. I had a little, one of the early motor caravans in that time, and I drifted around for some years, homeless, jobless, loveless, and alone. And it was a wretched time of life. I just picked fruit, I did what I could. If I can give you a demonstration, the beautiful demonstration of meditation, I hope the camera can see my hands, is just that. You see? Now this is how we live, forgetful of the one.
To hold on.
Of the one. We hold on. We hold on to our personal life. And so we're imprisoned within our ego, which is our sense of separation.
Yes.
And in meditation, it starts very gently at first, so it's not frightening or anything, but very gently it sort of helps you to do that. Now, when you let go, you discover that you're not actually separate at all. You're united. You're in that which is undivided. Indescribable, but undivided. There's not two at all, there's just one. One love. One person. Singular. Adam in the paradise was singular. One. One I am. Now that's what I'd been shown in this dramatic episode with this woman. The oneness. Well, you could say that then the real work began, because the two polarities had been clearly identified to me. Although I was too muddled really to put it as clearly as I'm saying to you now. But that's what gradually dawned on me. At one time in the motor caravan, I went and spent a winter in Spain, alone of course, and I spent hour after hour after hour just meditating. I moved from just doing the standard half hour, morning and night, and meditation became salvation. Because in salvation you're taken out of this imprisonment and you're shown what's real. You're saved from drowning in this world. Just like St. Peter was walking on water, he was drowning in the world. There was Jesus, free beside him. Peter was drowning. He said, "Help me." Jesus said, "What were you frightened about? What were you drowning for? Have faith." That's what it's all about. I had this wonderful practice, and this practice is such a wonderful way of putting it into practice. So twice every day, without fail, and for increasingly lengths of time, I was just surrendering to that total presence, and to that love that has no end, to that love that never says no, to pure total love, which I'd seen in her eyes, you see. And this is the great discovery, that man is not limited to the flesh. The flesh, as the Bible tells us, it profiteth nothing.
Yes.
The flesh is just, look, anything that dies, mortality, the whole world that comes to pass is not what we are. Man is eternal being. You know, I think one of the impediments, one of the things that stops us setting out on the spiritual life is that we're not sufficiently unhappy. We're too content with this sort of compromise with life, with all the little, you know, sandwich bars and baubles that life, you know, offers to us, the comfort of a teddy bear. And you know, for some people it's not good enough. You want more, you want the real thing. I was offered a job out in Africa, South Africa. I went out there, but the job didn't work out, so after some time I hired a little car and I just drove off. I didn't really have a plan. I didn't even have a proper map, but I just followed the road. And it all unfolded in front of me. I slept in the back of the car and or out on the ground, under the stars. I absolutely loved it. The space, the glorious space, and I never went to any big towns, the little ones. I just bought what I had to buy and got out into the open again. I just found the big empty spaces on the map and I went there. So I've always loved space and silence. They're just natural to me. I belong there. That's where I feel at home. When I was a boy at school, my favourite picture was of a cowboy riding up to the crest of a hill with the caption, "Don't fence me in." I loved that phrase. And Africa was, it was in that sense. Yes, and then I went on and I was in the Kalahari in the Namibian desert and that, I just loved it. It always sort of seemed to me obvious why the early Christians, why men of prayer went to the desert, and then I experienced it for myself, and it's just all so obvious there. It's all just before you, the infinite, and you are nothing. You're just taken into the immensity of what's there. The me, the John Butler, is just, you forget about it. It's just nothing.
Yeah.
I'd lost my job as a farmer. I was desperate to find some sort of work, and what on earth could I do? I wrote a CV at that time, and I remember more or less what I wrote. I wrote something about, I knew something about freedom, and therefore I could help others to freedom. And of course freedom is love. Love is freedom. The two are really the same thing, spiritually speaking. And if someone could give me a channel for my love, I'd give my all. That was what I was looking for, and of course, who answered my CV? Yes, nobody. I was looking for freedom in the world of bondage. We're such spiritual infants, Even now as an old man, I'm still a spiritual child. Yes. It's a long journey.
Yes.
And one's learning all the time. You learn something every day. And at that time, I was still grappling with questions that I had, that now I no longer have these problems. At that time, I met a teacher, a young man, and I looked in his eyes and I had that same experience of seeing the infinite beyond. And I followed him out to America,
yes,
to San Francisco. I was that desperate. I knew that's what I wanted. I didn't want anything else. And so I, as it were, jumped off the precipice to him. And while I was in America, after I'd been with him a few days, I remember there was a big meeting, and he looked at me, and he pointed out my pride, my arrogance, and my egoism, which was completely crushed me. And I felt within me a monstrous, almost like a worm. And I didn't know what to do with it at all. I was absolutely terrified. And I fled. Where did I flee to? I fled into the wilderness. I got a car and I just drove into the desert. And I thought I was going mad at that time. I had such a sense of evil within me. And I didn't know how to deal with it at all. I meditated, but somehow even meditation didn't deal with it. And fearing I was really going to lose my wits, I took a job as a cook in a funny little motel gas station, and I worked in the kitchen there, frying eggs and things. And this was in the Mojave Desert, which is just on the border of Arizona, surrounded by desert country. One day, after work, I walked up the side of the valley. There was this little motel, was a little spot down in the bottom of the valley, and I sat on a rock. And I think I put my head in my hands, and I think I just was finished then. And someone came and stood beside me. I didn't see anybody, I didn't hear anybody. No man was involved at all. But I felt there was a presence beside me. And I said, I suppose it was Jesus. I've never doubted it. It was nothing to do with the church, nothing to do with religion at all. And I didn't really notice any difference. Depression didn't end, but I wrote a poem, that's right. Depression didn't end, but from then on I had a friend.